He grabbed her arm, his face twisted in a mask of betrayal. "You lied to me. Our entire marriage. A lie." Sarah looked at her husband, Mark, his eyes fixed on the $4 million Maybach limousine waiting for her. She then looked at his mistress, Chloe, who was clutching Mark's arm, her cheap rented dress looking garish under the gala lights. Just 6 hours ago, Chloe had laughed in Sarah's face, mocking her junk pile 1998 Toyota Corolla. Now, that same woman was staring, speechless, at a woman who owned the entire city block. Sarah pulled her arm free, her voice as cold as steel. "I didn't lie, Mark. I just waited." The rain in downtown Manhattan had a special kind of misery. It wasn't a cleansing rain. It was a grey, gritty soak that made the city smell like wet concrete and exhaust. It was in this rain that Sarah Johnson, 6 months pregnant, tried 3 times to start her car. The 1998 hunter green Toyota Corolla, affectionately named the Bean, wasn't just a car. It was a fortress of anonymity. Its engine, a rattling, stubborn thing, finally turned over with a cough that sounded suspiciously final. Sarah patted the dashboard. "Come on, Bean. Just to the clinic and back. We can do this." Sarah lived a life of deliberate, careful simplicity. She and her husband, Mark Johnson, lived in a respectable but painfully average 2-bedroom apartment in a walk-up. Mark, a mid-level associate at a downtown finance firm, was a man perpetually chasing the next rung of the ladder. He wore suits that were just a little too tight, a watch that was a convincing replica of a Rolex, and a simmering resentment that grew louder with every bill. "Sarah, the electric bill is insane," he'd complained just that morning, tossing the envelope on the Formica countertop. "And this thing," he gestured to the rattling air conditioner, "is probably why." Sarah, stirring oatmeal, just nodded. "I'll be more careful with the lights." She didn't mention that the building's wiring was 2 decades old. She also didn't mention that she could buy the entire building, and the 3 adjacent to it, with a single phone call. Sarah Johnson was, in fact, Sarah Sterling. The Sterlings, the family whose name was carved into the granite facades of university libraries, museum wings, and the stock market itself. She had walked away from that life 8 years ago, disgusted by the parade of suitors who saw her as a walking, talking trust fund. She'd met Mark at a coffee shop where she was, to his mind, a struggling barista. To her, it was a gap year of real life. He'd been charming, ambitious, and seemed to see her. When he proposed, he'd presented a ring with a chip of a diamond so small it was barely visible. "It's all I can afford, Sarah," he'd said, his voice thick with earnestness. "But I'll spend my life getting you what you deserve." She'd wept and said yes, slipping her family's 300-year-old heirloom signet ring into a drawer where it remained. For 5 years, she played the part of Sarah Johnson. She learned to coupon, to mend socks, to listen to Mark's bitter complaints about his boss, Mr. Davies, and his smug rival, Tom. But lately, a new name had entered his complaints: Chloe. "Chloe says the Davies account is a dead end. Chloe thinks I should be more aggressive in the team meeting. Chloe's got a great eye for fashion. She helped me pick this tie." Sarah, packing a small bag for her specialist appointment, felt the baby kick. This was the one thing she wouldn't compromise on. Her family's doctor, the renowned Dr. Aris, was based at a private, high-end maternity clinic on Park Avenue. She'd told Mark it was a special program her old family doctor had gotten her into. Mark, hearing "free," hadn't questioned it. She grabbed her keys, the worn plastic fob clicking, and headed out into the rain, the Bean waiting for her like a faithful, weary old friend. The bean's wipers smeared the rain, fighting a losing battle against the downpour. Pulling onto Park Avenue was like driving a tugboat into a regatta of yachts. Gleaming black sedans and custom-paint SUVs glided past, their occupants invisible behind tinted glass. Sarah felt the familiar prickle of judgment from other drivers. She finally found the clinic, its entrance discreet and protected by a polished brass awning, and parked directly in the ambulatory patient-only zone, gleaming like a Black Panther, was Mark's leased BMW 5 Series. Sarah's blood ran cold. He was supposed to be in a budget meeting until 4 p.m. It was 2:30 p.m. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she parked the bean in a metered spot half a block down. She pulled her thin coat tighter and walked, the rain plastering her hair to her face. As she got closer, she saw him. Mark was standing under the awning, holding the door open. But he wasn't alone. With him was a woman, impossibly tall and thin, wrapped in a trench coat that screamed "this season" and laughing a high, tinkling laugh. It was Chloe. Her blonde hair was a perfect, sleek curtain. "Oh, Mark, you're a lifesaver," Chloe was saying, placing a perfectly manicured hand on his chest. "I just felt so dizzy. I think my blood sugar must have crashed." "Anything for my star associate," Mark said, his voice a low, intimate purr Sarah hadn't heard in years. He was looking at Chloe like she was the promotion he'd always wanted. "Mark." Her voice was small, lost in the city noise, but he heard it. His head snapped up. The smile on his face didn't just fade, it curdled. He looked at Sarah, at her wet hair, her swollen belly, her practical coat from a department store, and then his eyes landed on the bean, parked down the street, its faded green paint a beacon of shame. Chloe turned, her eyes doing a slow, insulting scan from Sarah's worn boots up to her face. "Well, hello," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" Mark stammered, taking a step away from Chloe, as if to create a physical boundary that his actions had already crossed. "This is my appointment," Sarah said, her hand instinctively going to her belly. "What are you doing here, Mark? With her?" Chloe let out that tinkling laugh again, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, this is her. Mark, darling, you didn't tell me." She took a step forward, her gaze flicking to the Corolla. "My God, is that yours?" she asked, pointing a red-nailed finger. "That thing. I thought it was abandoned. Are you sure it's safe to drive? I mean, in your condition." Sarah flinched as if struck. "Chloe, stop," Mark hissed, but there was no force in it. He was embarrassed, not of his affair, but of his wife. "I'm just being practical," Chloe said, her smile widening. "A car like that, it's a death trap. People will think, well, they'll think Mark isn't a very good provider, won't they?" She looked at Mark, a pout on her lips. "And we can't have that, can we? It reflects badly on the whole team." "Shut up, Chloe," Sarah said, her voice shaking with a sudden, cold rage. "Sarah, for God's sake, lower your voice," Mark snapped, his face red. "You're making a scene. People are watching." "I'm making a scene? I find my husband at my maternity clinic with his assistant, and I'm the one making a scene?" "She felt faint." "Okay," Mark yelled, grabbing Sarah's arm. "I was being a good boss, something you know nothing about. God, look at you. You can't even be bothered to look presentable. And you drive that junk pile. Chloe's right, it's humiliating." It was the word humiliating that did it. The word aimed at her, at the symbol of her hidden life, broke something deep inside her. The hurt was so sharp, so total, that it burned away the tears. Sarah looked at his hand on her arm, then back at his face. "Get your hand off me, Mark." "Or what?" Chloe taunted. You'll hit him with your grocery coupons? Mark, seeing the steel in Sarah's eyes, let go. Let's go, Mark, Chloe said, tugging his arm. She's clearly hormonal. We'll be late for our drink. She'd slipped. The dizzy spell was a lie. Mark hesitated, caught between the life he had and the one he wanted. He looked at his pregnant wife, standing in the rain, and then at the sleek, fashionable woman pulling him toward the warmth of his leased BMW. He made his choice. Just go home, Sarah, he said, turning his back on her. We'll talk when you're less emotional. Sarah watched them get into the BMW. She watched Chloe lean over and kiss him, long and slow, before they pulled away from the curb, splashing a wave of grey, gritty water onto Sarah's legs. She stood there, soaking wet, for a full minute. The doorman of the clinic watched her with pity. Then she slowly turned and walked into the clinic, leaving the 1998 Toyota Corolla behind. She wouldn't be needing it anymore. The clinic was a different world. It was carpeted in plush cream, smelled faintly of lavender, and had original impressionist paintings on the walls. The receptionist, who knew her only as Mrs. Johnson, gave her a sympathetic look. You're all wet, dear. Let me get you a towel. Thank you, Mary, Sarah said, her voice flat. She went through the motions of her appointment. The baby was strong. Heartbeat was perfect. Dr. Aris, a kind man in his 60s with sharp eyes, noticed her demeanor. Everything all right at home, Sarah? He asked, using her first name as he always did in private. Everything is changing, Dr. Aris, she said. Well, you and the baby are in perfect health. That's a strong, sterling heart in there, he said with a small smile. He was one of the few people in on her secret. Thank you, Doctor. I'm glad to hear it. After the appointment, Sarah didn't go to the lobby. She went to a private waiting room her family endowed. She sat on a silk settee, looked at a small, tasteful Monet, and took out her phone. She didn't call her mother. She didn't call a friend. She scrolled past Mark and dialed a number listed as Harrison. It rang once. Ms. Sterling, I was wondering when you'd call. Harrison Reed was her family's chief legal counsel. He spoke in quiet, precise tones that had dismantled billion-dollar mergers. Harrison, Sarah said, her voice clear and cold, all trace of Sarah Johnson gone. It's over. I want the papers drawn up by morning. Infidelity clause. There was a pause. Understood. And Mr. Johnson's access? He has a joint checking account with a $10,000 limit. Freeze it. Effective immediately. His name is on the apartment lease, but the apartment itself is owned by the Sterling Trust 3. Have him removed. He will be served at his office tomorrow? No, Sarah said, a new, hard idea forming in her mind. He'll be at the Metropolitan Children's Hospital Gala tonight. His firm bought a table. Harrison paused again. Ms. Sterling, you haven't attended the gala in 8 years. You are the anonymous angel donor. I'm not anonymous anymore. Call the organizers. I will be attending. I want my family's table front and center. And Harrison? Yes, Ms. Sterling. I want you to serve him at the gala, in front of everyone, tonight. It would be my distinct pleasure, Harrison said. She hung up and made a second call. This one was listed as Arthur. Arthur, I'm at the Park Avenue Clinic. I'm 10 minutes away, Miss Sarah. A deep, warm voice replied. Arthur had been her father's head of security, and hers since she was born. Bring the Maybach, Arthur. There was a slight, satisfied smile in his voice. Yes, ma'am. The Maybach it is. Welcome back, Mrs. Sterling. She hung up. She looked at her reflection in the darkened window, the wet, tired-looking woman in the $40 coat. She was a ghost. 10 minutes later, the clinic's doorman, who had seen her arrive in the Corolla, nearly swallowed his tongue. A car pulled up to the awning. But car was the wrong word. It was a 20-foot vessel of silent, obsidian power. A custom, armor-plated Mercedes-Maybach SA680 painted a deep, proprietary, sterling blue that looked black in the rain. It was a car that whispered, "Old money," so loudly it deafened everyone on the street. Arthur, in his full dark grey chauffeur's uniform, stepped out and opened the rear door. Sarah walked out of the clinic. She didn't look at the doorman. She didn't look at anyone. She slipped into the plush, cream-coloured leather interior that smelled like her father's study. "Where to, Miss Sarah?" Arthur asked, his eyes meeting hers in the rearview mirror. "Home, Martha," she said. "The real one." As the Maybach pulled silently away from the curb, Sarah Johnson's phone, a cheap, pay-as-you-go Android, buzzed. It was a text from Mark. Sarah looked at the phone. Then she powered it down, opened a small, polished wood compartment, and dropped it inside, next to a satellite phone she hadn't touched in 5 years. The Metropolitan Gala for the Children's Hospital was the event of the season. It was where New York's elite came to prove how much they cared, and more importantly, how much they could give. Mark Johnson felt like he'd finally arrived. His firm had a table, albeit in the back, near the kitchens. But they were in. He'd gone home to an empty apartment, which annoyed him. He'd yelled at Sarah's voicemail, changed into his rented tuxedo, and picked up Chloe. Chloe was vibrating with excitement. She wore a bright red, sequined dress that was far too loud for the event, rented from a high-end service. "Oh, Mark, look," she whispered, grabbing his arm. "That's Daniel Larson, the tech billionaire. And oh my God, is that a senator?" Mark puffed out his chest. "This is our world now, baby. You just have to be willing to take it." He'd conveniently forgotten his pregnant wife. He'd justified it to himself. "She's holding me back. She doesn't understand ambition. She doesn't understand me. Chloe does." "Let's go network," he said, plastering on a smile and grabbing 2 glasses of champagne. "I want to introduce myself to Mr. Blackwood from Titan Investments." They made their way through the sea of couture gowns and bespoke tuxedos. Mark felt a twinge of insecurity. His tux felt stiff, and Chloe's dress, next to the understated elegance of the other women, looked cheap. "Mr. Johnson, glad you could make it," said his boss, Mr. Davies, a portly man who looked nervous. He eyed Chloe. "And you brought your assistant?" "Chloe is an invaluable member of my team, sir," Mark said, trying to sound important. "Right," Davies said, clearly displeased. "Just try to be professional, Mark. A lot of important people are here. Don't embarrass the firm." As Davies walked away, Chloe sneered. "Old fool. He'll be kissing your feet when you land the Blackwood account." Mark scanned the room. The front tables surrounding the dance floor were a who's who of American royalty. The Rockefellers, the Vanderbilts, and the empty, imposing table one, which was always reserved for the hospital's biggest and most reclusive donor, the Anonymous Angel. "Look at that," Chloe whispered, pointing to the placard on table 1. "Reserved. I bet it's that Larson guy. He's going to make some huge donation and get his face everywhere. So tacky." "It's all about the show," Mark agreed, feeling cynical and worldly. Suddenly, the buzz in the room quieted. A line of paparazzi, usually kept outside, were being allowed into the entryway, their flashes starting to pop. "What's going on?" Chloe asked, craning her neck. The gala's host, a famous news anchor, walked to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice boomed, "we are so deeply, deeply honored tonight. For the first time in nearly a decade, our guest of honor, the patron whose generosity built our cardiac wing, has decided to join us. Please welcome Ms. Sarah Sterling." Mark froze. Sterling, as in Sterling Holdings? "It can't be," Chloe whispered, her face pale. "That's one of the richest families in the world. They don't—" "Go out!" Mark's heart was pounding. "Sarah, Sterling, no, it's a coincidence. It has to be." Then he saw her. The doors were opened. The first person to enter was Arthur, looking less like a chauffeur and more like a Secret Service agent. He scanned the room, gave a curt nod, and stepped aside. The woman who walked in was not Sarah Johnson. This woman moved with a silent, terrifying grace. She was 6 months pregnant, yes, but the pregnancy was draped in a bespoke, floor-length gown of the deepest emerald silk. It was a custom piece by Valentino, clearly designed to celebrate, not hide, her condition. Around her neck was a necklace that silenced the room. It was the legendary sterling emeralds, a cascade of flawless, deep green stones that hadn't been seen in public since her grandmother's funeral. They were worth, as one gossip columnist would later write, more than a small nation's GDP. Her hair, which had been plastered to her head by the rain, was now a cascade of rich, warm brown waves. Her face was serene, powerful, and utterly cold. Mark made a small, choking sound. "No," Chloe breathed, her champagne glass trembling. "That's not her. That's not her." Sarah Sterling glided into the ballroom. The organizers, Mr. Davies, and even Daniel Larson, the tech billionaire, flocked to her. "Ms. Sterling, what an honor. Sarah, you look radiant. Thank you so much for coming." She smiled, a small, polite, practiced smile. "Thank you for having me, Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice clear and carrying, to the very man Mark had been desperate to meet. Blackwood bowed his head slightly. "The honor is all ours. Your family's commitment to this hospital. We are indebted." Then her eyes swept the room. They passed over the tables, over the bar, and finally they landed on table 42, in the back, by the kitchens. Her eyes met Mark's. There was no anger in her gaze, no sadness, no recognition. She looked at him and at the woman beside him with the same mild, polite disinterest she would give a waiter. She looked through him. Then she turned and was escorted to table 1, the anonymous angels table where she sat, the undisputed queen of the room. Mark's entire body was shaking. That's my wife!" Chloe finally dropped her glass. It shattered on the floor, the sound impossibly loud in the suddenly quiet room. "Oh my God," she whispered. The whispers started immediately. "Isn't that Sarah Sterling? I thought she was a recluse. Who is that man she was staring at in the back? The one with the woman in the red dress? Wait, I think that's Mark Johnson from Davies & Co. Isn't that his wife?" Mr. Davies was walking toward Mark, his face the color of ash. Johnson. What in the hell is going on? But Mark didn't hear him. He was stumbling forward, pushing through the crowd, his mind a screaming vortex of confusion, terror, and a new, horrifying emotion. Greed. "Sarah!" he yelled, his voice cracking. "Sarah!" Mark broke through the circle of socialites and stumbled toward table 1. "Sarah, honey, what is this? What's going on?" Arthur stepped in his path before he was within 10 feet. His hand was up, palm out. "That's close enough, sir." "That's my wife!" Mark spat, his face manic. "Let me talk to my wife." Sarah looked up from her conversation with Senator Thompson. She didn't stand. She simply tilted her head. "Arthur, it's all right. Let Mr. Johnson approach." Arthur stepped aside. Mark rushed to the table, his rented shoes slipping on the marble. Chloe was right behind him, her face a mask of abject horror. "Sarah, what is this?" Mark panted, gripping the back of a chair. This dress, these jewels. This is a joke, right? A crazy, elaborate joke?" Sarah took a slow sip of her mineral water. "Hello, Mark. Hello, Chloe. I see you made it." "She knows my name," Chloe whispered, as if that were the most terrifying part. I don't understand," Mark said, his voice pleading. "The apartment, the bean, your job?" "The bean," Sarah said, a small, cold smile touching her lips. "Yes, my 1998 Corolla. It was a gift from my grandfather. A reminder," he said, "that a person's worth is not in what they drive, but in who they are. A lesson," she added, her eyes flicking to Chloe, "that some people never learn." Chloe shrank back, her sequined dress suddenly feeling like a coat of tar. The woman she had mocked for driving a junk pile had arrived in a $4 million limousine. The woman she had called destitute was wearing a necklace that could buy her entire life, her parents' lives, and their parents' lives before them. "You lied to me," Mark whispered, his confusion hardening into rage. "For 5 years, you let me kill myself working for pennies. You let me stress about bills. What could we have had?" "We had what I wanted," Sarah said, her voice rising just enough to be heard clearly by the surrounding tables, who were all pretending not to listen. "We had a real life. Or so I thought. I wanted a man who loved me. Sarah the barista, not Ms. Sterling the heiress. I wanted a man who would build a life with me, who valued love and loyalty. A man who wouldn't be embarrassed by an old car." She stood up, slowly, her hand on her belly. She was now eye to eye with him. "But that man, it seems, doesn't exist. Instead, I got a man who couldn't wait to trade his pregnant wife for a—" She looked Chloe up and down. "A flashy upgrade. A man who was humiliated by a car, but not by his own infidelity." "Sarah, please, I love you," Mark begged, reaching for her. "I was stupid. It was a mistake. Chloe means nothing. It was just, I was stressed about money." "Money," Sarah repeated, the word tasting like ash. "It was always about money, wasn't it, Mark? You didn't love me. You loved the idea of a wife. And when a shinier idea came along, you jumped at it. The only thing you did wrong, Mark, was have terrible timing." From behind Mark, a quiet voice said, "Mr. Johnson?" Mark turned. It was Harrison Reed, looking immaculate in a tuxedo, holding a thick manila envelope. "What?" Mark snapped. "Mark Johnson," Harrison said, his voice polite but projecting across the ballroom. "You have been served." He placed the envelope in Mark's stunned hand. "Divorce papers," Sarah explained, smoothing the front of her gown. "Citing infidelity, among other things. The apartment, which is owned by my trust, will have new locks by morning. The joint account, which I funded, is frozen. Your firm—" She nodded at a pale-faced Mr. Davies, who was watching from a few feet away. "Will be receiving a call from my legal team in the morning regarding the termination of your employment for using company time and resources to conduct your affair. Oh, and for harassing a benefactor at a charity event." Mr. Davies promptly fainted. "You can't do this," Mark roared, his face purple. He ripped the envelope open, pulling out the thick stack of papers. "I can," Sarah said. "And I have. You see, Mark, you married Sarah Johnson, a barista with no family and no money, but you cheated on Sarah Sterling. And the Sterlings, we protect what is ours. My child," she placed both hands on her belly, "is a Sterling. You are nothing." She looked past him, at Chloe, who was backing away, tears of pure, unadulterated terror streaming down her face. "And you," Sarah said. "You laughed at my car. It's true, it's old, but it's paid for. Can you say the same about that dress, or him?" Sarah nodded to Arthur. "Arthur, please get the car. I'm suddenly very tired." She turned and walked away, not looking back. The entire ballroom parted for her like the Red Sea. Mark Johnson was left standing alone, in a rented tux, holding the ruin of his life in his hands, as the flashes of 100 cameras went off in his face. The aftermath was not a war. It was an execution. It was the silent, systematic dismantling of a life, performed with the kind of bloodless, terrifying efficiency that only generations of old money can perfect. For Mark Johnson, the night of the gala ended not in a plush bed, but in the back of a taxi he could barely afford, after being physically escorted from the premises. He spent the night in a 24-hour diner, nursing a single bitter coffee, his rented tuxedo feeling like a clown suit. He was still reeling, his mind a fractured kaleidoscope of emeralds, divorce papers, and the Post reporter's flashbulb, which had seemed to explode in his face. "It's a mistake," he kept muttering to the dregs in his cup. "A test. A sick, twisted test. She'll call. She has to." She did not call. At 7 a.m., he left the diner and walked the 20 blocks to the apartment, a pathetic, desperate hope still flickering. His key slid into the lock and stopped. It didn't turn. He pushed, jiggled, then banged his fist against the solid oak door. "Sarah! Sarah, let me in! We need to talk!" A small metallic click sounded, and the intercom crackled. It was not Sarah's voice. "Mr. Johnson?" The voice was deep, male, and bored. "We are private security. Ms. Sterling has left instructions that you are not to enter the premises. If you do not leave, we will have you arrested for trespassing." "This is my apartment," he roared, his voice cracking. "The lease is held by the Sterling 3 Trust, sir, of which you are not a beneficiary. You have 1 hour to vacate the vicinity of the building." The intercom clicked off. Defeated and trembling with a rage that had no outlet, Mark stumbled back to the street. He was homeless. At 8:45 a.m., his phone, which he'd been charging with a borrowed cord at the diner, buzzed. It was an email from HR. The subject line was chillingly simple. Termination of employment. "Dear Mr. Johnson," it read, "this email serves as official notice of your immediate termination from Davies & Co. for gross misconduct, breach of morality clause, and conduct unbecoming an associate of this firm. Your presence at the Metropolitan Children's Hospital Gala, your harassment of a chief benefactor, and the subsequent public scandal have brought irreparable harm to our reputation. Do not attempt to enter the premises. Security has been instructed to remove you. Your personal effects will be mailed to a forwarding address, should you provide one." It was signed by Mr. Davies. At 8:47 a.m. he tried to call Chloe. It went straight to voicemail. He tried again. Voicemail. He sent a frantic text. "They fired me. Sarah is a billionaire. She's trying to destroy us. Call me. We have to fight this together." He went to an ATM to pull out cash. He had to hire a lawyer. He had to do something. He put in his debit card for the joint account. The account he'd always felt was their money, even though he knew Sarah deposited more into it from her freelance work than he did. He entered his PIN. He requested $500. The screen flashed red. She hadn't just frozen it. She'd emptied it. The $10,000 limit he thought he had access to was gone. He checked his personal account. Balance, 1,241 or 158. That was it. That was all he had in the world. His phone buzzed. A text from Chloe. "Don't ever contact me again. You ruined my life." He called her again, and this time she picked up, her voice a venomous shriek. "Are you insane? Don't call me." Chloe, wait! We have to nothing, she screamed. I just got fired. Fired! Davies called me himself. He said I was a disreputable gold digger, and that if I ever tried to find work in this city again, he'd personally blackball me. My landlord just evicted me because the firm called and cancelled their cosign on my lease, all because of you. Me? Mark was aghast. You were part of this. You wanted this. I wanted an associate partner. I wanted a house in the Hamptons. I didn't want to be on the cover of the Post as the mistress who got laughed out of a gala by a sterling. You told me she was a nobody, Mark. A broke, pregnant, pathetic little wife. You didn't tell me you were married to a goddess. You're a fool, Mark. The biggest, dumbest fool in New York. You had everything, and you were too stupid to see it. Goodbye. Lose my number. The line went dead. He was, in the span of 12 hours, wifeless, jobless, homeless, and utterly, totally alone. Mark's world shrank. The next 2 months were a blur of escalating humiliations. He sold his replica Rolex for $300. He sold his tight-fitting, ambitious suits to a consignment shop, where they gave him pennies on the dollar. He moved into a grimy, shared room in a hostel in Queens, the smell of mildew and boiled cabbage clinging to his clothes. He became obsessed. This wasn't his fault. It was a trap. Sarah had defrauded him. She had lied for 5 years, playing him for a fool. He was the victim. He was the one who had suffered emotional distress. He took his $200 and went to a lawyer. The first 3, all respectable firms, showed him the door the moment he said the name Sterling. We cannot assist you, Mr. Johnson. I'd advise you to take the settlement, if one is offered. You don't have a case. You have a death wish. He finally found a man named Leo Sarnoff, a lawyer who advertised on bus station benches, whose office smelled like stale cigars and desperation. Sarnoff's eyes lit up when he heard the story. Fraudulent misrepresentation, Sarnoff said, leaning back in his creaking chair. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. She hid her assets, misrepresented her identity. This is a gold mine, my friend. A gold mine. We'll sue for, let's say, $20 million. Mark felt the first spark of hope he'd had in weeks. Yes, he said, his voice hoarse. Exactly. She lied to me. She humiliated me. Sarnoff, of course, was just running a play. He filed the suit, hoping the Sterling family would offer a quick, quiet, 6-figure settlement, just to make the gutter rat go away. He had disastrously miscalculated. The Sterlings did not settle. They did not negotiate. They crushed. They didn't just respond. They countersued. They sent Harrison Reed. The deposition was held in a sterile, glass-walled conference room in Harrison's downtown office. Mark, in his one remaining suit, now baggy on his thinner frame, sat across from Harrison, who looked as immaculate as ever. Sarnoff sat beside Mark, shuffling papers nervously. Mr. Johnson, Harrison began, his voice quiet, you claim my client, Miss Sterling, fraudulently misrepresented herself, causing you emotional distress and financial hardship. Is that correct? Yes, Mark said, trying to sound firm. She lied for 5 years. She pretended to be poor. She ruined my reputation. I see, Harrison said. He opened a binder. Let's talk about your reputation. On the afternoon of October 2nd, the day of the gala, you were at the Park Avenue Maternity Clinic with your assistant, Ms. Chloe Bennett. You told your wife you were in a budget meeting. Was that a fraudulent misrepresentation, Mr. Johnson? Sarnoff objected. Relevance? It speaks to the pattern of deceit, counsel, which your client alleges he is the victim of, Harrison said smoothly, never taking his eyes off Mark. Let's continue. You claim your distress began at the gala, upon learning of your wife's identity. But your distress seems to have started much earlier. Let's talk about May 14th, 2024. You were on a business trip to Miami. You filed an expense report for $4,000 for client entertainment. The client you listed was a Mr. Reynolds. Harrison slid a photograph across the table. It was Mark on a yacht, his arm around a woman in a bikini who was decidedly not Sarah and not Chloe. Mark's blood turned to ice. That's confidential. That is Ms. Anya Petrova, a consultant based in Miami, Harrison continued. There is no Mr. Reynolds. You embezzled $4,000 from your firm to conduct an extramarital affair. An affair, I might add, that took place 3 weeks after Ms. Sterling tearfully told you she was pregnant. Sarnoff's face went pale. Mark, what is this? And then there's September 2023, Harrison said, sliding another stack of papers. Hotel receipts from the Hamptons. A team-building exercise. You were the only team member present, along with a Ms. Jacobs. And then there is the matter of the bonus you received in 2022. You told your wife it was $10,000. It was, in fact, $50,000. The other $40,000 you routed to an offshore account, which you've been using to fund, well, this. Harrison produced a 3-inch thick binder of texts, receipts, and photographs. Mark wasn't just a cheater. He was a serial cheater. He was a petty, habitual liar and a small-time embezzler. Chloe hadn't been the first. She was just the loudest. Mark stared at the evidence, his mind blank with terror. He had no idea. How could they know? He'd been so careful. My client, Mr. Johnson, Harrison said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, was willing to forgive your ambition. She was even for a time willing to overlook your emotional neglect. But what she found on the afternoon of October 2nd was not an aberration. It was a pattern. You are a man who is fundamentally incapable of telling the truth. Harrison leaned in. So no, Mr. Johnson, we will not be settling. Your countersuit for emotional distress is a joke. The prenatal agreement you signed, perhaps you should have read it. The prenup? Mark stammered. She had nothing. It was a joke. Ah, but it wasn't, Harrison said, tapping a document Sarnoff had been given copies of, but had clearly not read. Article 4, Section 2, the Infidelity Clause. It states that in the event of proven marital infidelity, the non-moneyed party, that's you, Mr. Johnson, forfeits any and all claims to spousal support, property or compensation, present or future, real or perceived. By cheating on Ms. Sterling, you not only lost your wife, you legally disinherited yourself from any claim at all. Harrison stood up, smoothing his jacket. You didn't just lie to your wife, Mr. Johnson. You lied to your lawyer. This deposition is over. My firm will be forwarding our findings regarding your creative accounting to the IRS and the New York State Attorney General's office. Have a wonderful day. Sarnoff, white as a sheet, threw his pen on the table. You idiot! He hissed at Mark as Harrison left the room. You're a dead man. You lied to me. We're done. You're on your own. Mark was left alone in the glass room, staring at the pictures of a life he didn't even remember, a life of casual betrayals that had just culminated in his total, irreversible ruin. While Mark's world was imploding, Sarah Sterling's was being reborn. 6 months after the gala, on a bright, clear spring day, Sarah gave birth to a healthy, 7-pound baby boy. She named him Arthur Sterling, after the man who had been her protector, her driver, and her most loyal friend. Her life settled into a new, powerful rhythm. She was on the cover of magazines, not the Post, but Forbes and Time. The reluctant heiress takes the reins, one headline read. She seamlessly took control of the Sterling Foundation, proving to have her father's sharp mind for investment and her mother's compassionate eye for philanthropy. She didn't just write checks, she restructured the entire organization, focusing on women's shelters and children's legal aid. The penthouse on Central Park, which she had grown up in, was no longer a gilded cage. It was a home filled with light and the sounds of her son. The sterling emeralds were back in the vault. Her preferred uniform was now cashmere sweaters, soft jeans, and practical, flat-soled shoes. The hunter green Toyota Corolla, the Bean, was still in the penthouse garage, parked next to the Maybach. For a month, Sarah couldn't decide what to do with it. It was a symbol of her lies, but also a symbol of her hope. One day, she had Arthur drive her to a women's shelter in the Bronx, one her foundation was now funding. She met the director, a no-nonsense woman named Maria. Sarah handed her a check for $5 million. Then she handed her the keys to the Bean. It's an old car," Sarah said, "but it's reliable. It got me through the worst days of my life. I thought, maybe it could help someone else start their new one." Maria, who had seen it all, had tears in her eyes. "Miss Sterling, you have no idea." It was a crisp autumn afternoon, a full year after the gala. Sarah was in Central Park, pushing Arthur's stroller. The air smelled of roasted chestnuts and possibility. She felt content, healed. She stopped at a vendor's cart to buy a bottle of water. And then she heard a voice she hadn't heard in a year, but one that was etched into her memory. $2.50. It was $2 yesterday. That's robbery. You're ripping me off." She turned. It took her a full 10 seconds to recognize him. The man arguing with the hot dog vendor was a ghost. He was skeletal, his skin sallow and grey. He was wearing a filthy puffer jacket, 2 sizes too big, and his hair was lank and greasy. The simmering resentment she had known so well was still there, but now it was the acidic, desperate rage of the truly destitute. "Price went up, buddy. Take it or leave it," the vendor said, unimpressed. Mark dug into his pocket, pulling out a handful of change, his fingers trembling. As he counted out the coins, his eyes drifted, and they locked with hers. He froze. His gaze flicked from her face, healthy, calm, beautiful, to the top-of-the-line stroller, to the sleeping, healthy baby nestled inside, to the large, watchful figure of Arthur, standing 10 feet away. And finally, to the sterling blue Maybach, parked silently at the curb, its polish reflecting the autumn sky. He saw it all, everything he had thrown away. A wave of emotions, so violent it made him dizzy, washed over him. Shame, rage, regret. And then, a final, pathetic, desperate sliver of an idea. A con man's last play. He abandoned the hot dog and stumbled toward her, his hands outstretched. "Sarah," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Sarah, my God." "It's you." Arthur stepped forward instantly, his body blocking Mark's path. "Miss Sterling, shall I call the police?" "No, Arthur," Sarah said, her voice quiet but firm. She put her hand on the stroller. "It's all right. Let him speak." Mark looked at Arthur with a flicker of his old arrogance. "This is a private conversation, between me and my wife." "I am not your wife, Mark," Sarah said simply. "The divorce was finalized 11 months ago. You know that. What do you want?" Tears, real or manufactured, welled in Mark's eyes. "Sarah, look at me. Just look at what you did to me." "What I did?" she asked, her voice not rising, not even in anger. It was the voice of a scientist observing a specimen. "I was a fool," he cried, dropping to his knees on the pavement. People were starting to stop, to watch. "I was an idiot. I see that now. I was poisoned by that world, by the firm, by Chloe. They pressured me, but it was never real. Not like we were. He was crawling, trying to get past Arthur, trying to touch her, the life we had, Sarah, in the apartment, with the bean. That was real. I loved that life. I loved you, not the money. I never cared about the money. I loved you. I miss you, Sarah. Please, I've learned my lesson. I'm a broken man. His eyes darted to the stroller. And my son. Our son. You can't keep him from me. I have rights. The park was silent, save for his hitched, desperate sobs. Sarah looked down at him, this hollowed-out shell of the man she had once loved, and she felt nothing. No anger, no revenge, just a profound, final, weary pity. "You don't miss me, Mark," she said, her voice as clear and crisp as the autumn's air. "You miss what I represent. You say you miss our life? The one where you were sleeping with half of Manhattan while I was at home, mending your socks? The one where you came home and complained about the electric bill while you were wiring $40,000 to an offshore account? That life?" Mark's sobs hitched. He had no idea she knew everything. "You didn't love me," she continued. "You were embarrassed by me. You were humiliated by my old car, by my cheap coat, by my simplicity. The only thing you loved about me was that I made you feel big. And the moment a woman in a designer dress made you feel bigger, you didn't even hesitate." She adjusted the blanket on her sleeping son. "And you dare!" Her voice dropped, and for the first time, a sliver of sterling steel cut through. "You dare ask about my son. His name is Arthur Sterling. He will be raised to be a man who values loyalty, honesty, and character. He will be taught that a person's worth is in who they are, not what they drive. He will, in short, be taught to be everything you are not. You don't have rights. You have the consequences of your actions." She looked at him, one last time, this man kneeling on the dirty pavement. "You're right about one thing, Mark. You were a fool. You had a winning lottery ticket in your hand for 5 years. You had a real, honest love, and you were too busy complaining about the paper it was printed on to ever cash it in. You didn't just lose a fortune, you lost a family." She nodded to Arthur. "We're leaving." "Sarah, no! Wait! Please!" He scrambled to his feet, lunging for the stroller. He never made it. Arthur's arm shot out, catching Mark by the chest. It wasn't a push, it was a simple, immovable stop, like a steel girder. Mark bounced off him and crumpled back to the pavement. "Don't touch the child," Arthur said, his voice a low, terrifying rumble. Sarah didn't look back. She didn't flinch. She simply pushed the stroller, her steps even and calm, toward the waiting Maybach. Arthur held his position for a 10 count, his eyes locked on the pathetic man on the ground, before turning and following his employer. The car door opened, the stroller was secured, and they slipped inside. The door closed with a silent, heavy thud, sealing the world out. Mark Johnson was left alone on the sidewalk, clutching his lukewarm, half-paid-for hot dog, the smell of mustard and failure his only companion. He watched the sterling blue limousine pull silently away from the curb, merging into the traffic, a river of wealth and power he would never, ever touch again. He had nothing. He was nothing. And the worst part? He finally knew it. Thank you for watching this story to the end. We've all seen people judged for what they have, or what they don't have. Sarah had to build a wall of lies to find something real, only for her husband, Mark, to prove he was blinded by the very thing she was hiding. He didn't just lose a wealthy wife, he lost a loyal partner and a family, all because he couldn't see the value in a person over the price tag of their car. What would you have done in Sarah's position? Would you have ever revealed the truth? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you are captivated by this story of betrayal and empowerment, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to see it, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more real-life drama every week.